Welcome everyone to today's program. I am Ayla Ellison with Becker's Healthcare. The program will begin with a presentation and we will have a question and answer session following completion of the presentation. You can submit any questions you have throughout the presentation by typing them into your control panel in the space labeled Enter a Question for Staff and clicking Send. Our presenters will attempt to answer as many questions as they can during the time we have and will follow up on questions they do not have the opportunity to address. You will receive an email within about 1 week following the webinar that will include instructions for how you can download a copy of the presentation. You will also receive a follow-up email shortly after completion of the program. You can submit your feedback or any additional questions at that time. This email will not include the presentation. It is now my pleasure to introduce today's presenters. As Vice President of Clinical Operations for Cardinal Health, Heather O'Sullivan brings more than 15 years of executive and clinical practice experience. Currently, she works with customers to analyze clinical protocols of hospital partners while identifying the highest levels of variability. Her expertise covers the entire care continuum as well as alternative sites of care on both the payer and provider side. Heather has experience with health systems, health plans, and in the home health environment. Heather has a Bachelor of Science in Nursing from the Medical University of South Carolina and Master of Science in Nursing from Simmons College in Boston, Massachusetts. Our second presenter today is Steve Thompson. He is Vice President of Supply Chain Innovation for Cardinal Health. As a Lean Six Sigma Master Black Belt, he works with healthcare providers, medical product, and device manufacturers to improve efficiencies and lower costs. Since joining Cardinal Health in 2006, Steve developed customized supply chain solutions for medical distribution, pre-source products and services, and the pharmaceutical technologies manufacturing business. As a result, hospitals have more precise visibility over the use of products and devices. They are able to connect purchasing to utilization and reduce the time that clinicians spend managing and tracking supplies. Steve builds on more than 2 decades of supply chain management experience in the automotive sector. He began his career at General Motors of Canada and Delphi Automotive Systems, assigned to one of GM's first Lean Enterprises facilities. He later worked in supply chain management and manufacturing with Lear Corporation. Now it's my pleasure to turn the program over to our 2 presenters.
Thank you and welcome. My name is Heather O'Sullivan. I'm a nurse practitioner and Vice President of Clinical Operations at Cardinal Health. With me today is my colleague Steve Thompson, Vice President of Supply Chain Innovation at Cardinal Health. Our discussions today will focus on the evolving healthcare trends to transform your supply chain into an engine of savings so you can improve your bottom line while supporting your hospital's focus on quality care. The heart of this solution is managing your supply inventory more effectively. With the increasing financial pressures, we know how difficult managing these day-to-day challenges can be. I have more than 15 years of executive and clinical practice experience, including directing new business opportunities for risk-based clinical models. And Steve is a Lean Six Sigma Master Black Belt who uses data analytics and process improvement to strengthen the healthcare supply chain. In our discussion together, we will explain how supply chain challenges are universal and how they can be addressed during the rapidly changing healthcare models affecting the economics of your hospital system. To get us started, we'll begin today with a brief overview of Cardinal Health, then move on to the healthcare trends impacting the hospital supply chain, why the traditional solutions to these challenges no longer work, and finally, we'll share alternative ways to manage inventory and improve clinical efficiency. These are proven best practices that you can put to use right away to lower costs while focusing on improving quality of care. The challenges in healthcare supply chain are complex, but the answer does not have to be. You just have to know where to look. So let's get started. As a clinician myself, I know I'd rather spend my time taking care of patients instead of focusing on products, and yet I've navigated inventory management issues my entire career. I found that you can overcome product issues if you collaborate with the right people. And that's where Cardinal Health comes in, with a wealth of knowledge and experience in helping hospitals create more supply chain value so everything runs more efficiently, and clinicians have time to provide care, ensuring clinical time at the bedside, which is important in today's environment, as the acute length of stay is decreasing. So the true time the clinicians have to impact care is becoming more and more compressed. For these reasons, focusing on supply chain transformation has never been more critical. Let's talk more specifically about the major trends and challenges today and ensure we all have the basic framework to work on. One of the most critical shifts in healthcare we're all experiencing is the evolution from fee-for-service to value-based payments. As a refresher, value-based payments take many forms, but involve the transfer of financial risk from payer to provider, with upside for differentiated outcomes. Reimbursement models are rapidly shifting away from fee-for-service to fee-for-value. In a fee-for-value world, payers and providers are accountable for cost and quality, including post-acute care settings. Hospitals will now be responsible for what happens outside of their four walls financially. Therefore, hospitals and post-acute providers must better coordinate transitions of care versus historical fee-for-service, where each provider and site of care is paid individually for service provided based on contracted rates. Alternative value-based models can be considered in two frameworks, ACO and bundled payments. In the ACO structure, when the ACO succeeds both in delivering high-quality care and spending healthcare dollars more wisely across a dedicated population, it then shares in the savings. ACOs manage the health of the population and focuses on keeping the patient outside of the hospital. In contrast, bundled payments cover services provided during an episode of care, including 30 to 90 days post-discharge. The difference between a bundled price and the actual cost of care is shared among participating providers. Bundled payments improve efficiency of care for patients who are admitted to the hospital. CMS identified 48 conditions for bundling that together represent 70% of spending on episodes of care. This is the first time in the history of Medicare that there are explicit goals for making the shift from fee-for-service to voluntary volume-based payments. By 2016, 30% of reimbursements must be based on alternative payment models, such as bundled payments and ACOs. And by 2018, that percentage increases to a full 50%. The reason the shift is happening so rapidly is that the Affordable Care Act gives the Department of Health and Human Services full authority, without the need for congressional approval, to expand alternative payment and delivery models. The only caveat is that these models must reduce the growth in healthcare spending without lowering quality, or these models must improve care without increasing spending. Among the two alternative value-based models we've discussed, voluntary bundled payments have gained more traction than ACOs. A reason for this could be that hospitals perceive themselves more able to manage a defined episode of care, more so than the health of their population, which is evidenced by greater provider enrollment in CMS's bundled payment for care improvement, otherwise known as BPCI program, than in ACOs. You likely have heard the recent announcement proposing mandated bundled payments for hip and knee replacement procedures at over 800 hospitals starting in January 2016. This is referred to as Comprehensive Care for Joint Replacement, or CCJR. CCJR is a 5-year mandatory bundled payment program which addresses care continuum fragmentation by focusing on coordinated patient-centric care for hip and knee replacements. CCJR targets 111,000 joint procedures annually and accounts for $12.3 billion in Medicare spending across the 5-year proposed program term. CCR covers 33 states, and the CCR-JR bundle begins with admission to an acute facility for DRGs 469 or 470. Regardless of the model, either bundles or ACOs, the shift to value-based payments is accelerating. And this is accelerating the consolidation of healthcare providers in an effort to create a more seamless and efficient continuum of care. In fact, today, 43% of Medicare patients utilize post-acute care after hospital discharge, and there's a wide variation in costs across each setting of the 14 million annual Medicare discharges. I feel it is important to talk a bit more about what else is driving this changing landscape and what the shift to value-based care means to healthcare providers. Providers are experiencing an urgent need to control costs more than ever before, as declining reimbursements are impacting hospital revenues and post-acute sites of care are impacting profits. Specifically, there's new and increasing pressure to reduce spending while improving outcomes at the same time. And providers are under more pressure to demonstrate differentiated outcomes and improve care coordination, not to mention patient care itself. At stake are hospital and physician bonuses, which are increasingly based on measuring performance in improving costs, quality, and patient outcomes. Today, more than $65 billion in medical spending is directed to value-based programs covering 24 million members, and every dollar in 5 is tied to programs that link contracts with physicians, hospitals, outcomes, and cost measures. In summary, healthcare needs a new source of savings, and now we will start discussing where to look. In the past, labor was typically the first place the healthcare industry targeted for savings. But healthcare reform and an aging patient population have driven us all to look beyond labor for new savings. An obvious target is supply cost. After all, materials are 35% of hospital expenses. That number continues to grow, which makes it a strong opportunity for cost reduction. Today, there's tremendous pressure to reduce product costs as declining reimbursements threaten hospital revenues and operating room profits. In response, manufacturers are commoditizing many products to meet provider demands for lower prices. I can tell you from my own experience that we're at a point now where there's little wiggle room left to lower prices. Staff right-sizing has already occurred, hospital consolidation is on its way to being mature, and as we discussed, the acute length of stay has been reduced. And yet at least 10,000 individuals are turning 65 years old every day. This will continue to drive costs without unique new approaches. That leaves us with the supply chain as the new source of savings. And it also begs the question, where are all the savings hidden in that supply chain? In one word, I would say it's waste. There's tremendous waste throughout the healthcare supply chain. Every year that waste adds up to $5 billion. And this number keeps going in one direction, which is up. This is everyone's problem, providers and manufacturers alike. And who pays for it? We all do. The government, insurance companies, and most of all, our patients. Think of the difference that $5 billion would make if we could redirect it to providing better care. That's why we're here today. While the problem is everyone's, so is the solution. Together we can solve this, and the time to act is now. Everyone will benefit when we start to chip away at that $5 billion in waste. By healing the supply chain, we'll improve efficiency, lower costs, improve clinician and patient satisfaction, and most of all, the quality of care. But to start the healing, first we need to understand where all the waste is coming from. The root of all the waste and rising costs is how complex today's healthcare supply chain has become. Several challenges are driving this complexity. For starters, margins are eroding due to the rising cost of materials, coupled with the pressure to reduce cost. Next, manual inventory management is inefficient and prone to human error. Then there are the multiple systems that operate in silos and don't talk to one another effectively, which further complicates product stocking and inventory management. The solution is working together to meet these challenges and thereby lower supply chain costs and succeed as the healthcare industry shifts to value-based payments. Our vision is evolving the supply chain from a collection of disjointed silos into a seamless continuum that operates efficiently from end to end. Transparency is the key, being able to share product and utilization information at every touch point. Then, having the analytics to transform this data into actionable information that leads to more effective decision making. And finally, overlay a logistics platform that moves products according to what we learn from data-based metrics and goals. If it all sounds too good to be true, let us show you how this model has operated successfully in other industries for years. Steve, given your deep operational experiences, could you elaborate more on executing supply change in the supply chain during these evolving economic reframing of our hospitals? Starting with an example of how the supply chain works would be helpful, and more importantly, what we can learn from their example.
Absolutely, Heather. Let's look at how the retail supply chain works. Now, let's see what happens when you buy a disposable razor at the supermarket. At the checkout counter, you start a chain of events that link the razor you just purchased to demand analytics, back to the distributor or wholesaler, and all the way back to the manufacturer. Your purchase may also be linked to your personal purchasing habits, and then that data might go on to a company that monitors consumer purchasing behavior, such as Nielsen. The result is a total upstream visibility of your razor from the manufacturer's facility to the point of sale and into your hand. The manufacturer now has an advanced set of data to analyze and truly understand consumer needs, which makes demand planning more accurate. The manufacturer can set production quotas based on real-world data and produce just the right amount of razors to meet customer demand. No more, no less. So there's far less waste and inefficiency, and far less need to overstock and hoard products. The data tells the razor manufacturer and retailer exactly how to right-size inventory levels. In a nutshell, the data makes it possible to have a more effective supply chain. Now, the retail industry can do it for a disposable razor, and the grocery industry can do it for a can of beans. Sadly, the healthcare industry cannot do it for supplies that cost many thousands of dollars more. For example, imagine if we had that same level of data granularity for a hip prosthesis as we do for that razor. A hip prosthesis can cost upwards of $18,000. Think about it, it's a far cry from a razor that costs less than your favorite latte. And unlike the razor manufacturer, there is no data capture and connectivity from the point of care back to the manufacturer. No upstream visibility, no real-world data and analytics that can help us understand demand planning. And hips aren't the only product with a problem. It's affecting all of the thousands of products in the healthcare supply chain. It's not that we're completely flying blind. The healthcare supply chain has a very good data on purchases from the manufacturer to the distributor to the provider's door. And we do know that it was shipped, we know it was purchased, and we assume that it was eventually used to care for a patient. But that's where the story stops cold. We don't have any data about the next critical moment, the actual use of the product at the point of care. Going back to our razor example, we know a razor was bought, perhaps even who bought it. But unlike the hip implantable, we don't really need to know anything about what happened to it post-checkout counter. Why does the healthcare industry have such a difficult time managing inventory? I can think of at least 10 major barriers that prevent us from more effectively managing inventory. But the most prevalent and pressing problems are related more directly to cost, including issues with inaccurate charge capture, the high cost of physician preference items, and the complexity caused by a wide diversity of procedures and service lines that can lead to higher than needed inventory investment. For example, a lot of service lines feed into the OR, such as cardiac, orthopedics. The complexity is not just the various component sizes, styles, and applications, but the fact that there are often multiple manufacturers of each of those sizes and styles present. Not only does this create more complexity and variation from an inventory management point of view, it's also a barrier to clinical standardization and predictability. But duplication is just the beginning of what makes inventory management such a challenge. There are many more challenges, including expired and obsolete products, limited data, procedure card management, the lack of automated inventory systems, multiple supply chain categories, and managing exorbitant system costs for consigned inventory. On top of all that, there are multiple categories of commodities stocked throughout the hospital, and they're a growing target for providers faced with relentless pressure to lower costs. It's a rich opportunity for standardization. How do we overcome these challenges to improve effectiveness and reduce costs? And whose responsibility is it? And to get to that answer, we should consider the priorities of each of the stakeholders in your health system. The supply chain manager, department directors, business manager, and clinicians all have their own sets of priorities, as you can see here. For example, the supply chain manager may focus more on product visibility and eliminating waste, while clinicians focus on patient care and documenting implants. But everyone's goals are actually more aligned than you might think. A good example is that clinicians also need to care about product visibility to make sure they have the right item available when it's needed. We've studied multiple workflows, and clinical staffs are often spending upwards of 25% of their time doing materials management functions. A good example of this is closed cabinet inventory storage systems. The nurse is required to log in, locate a product in the system, open a locked door, press a take button, close the door, return to the system, locate a specific patient, assign that item to the patient, and log out. This task takes anywhere from 45 to 75 seconds, which is not a big deal, unless the nurse does this 120 times per shift, in which case it represents 2 hours of what should be clinical time. As an aside, in patient care areas, the cost of those transactions is often higher than the value of the products that they're trying to control. And while it seems like everyone is generally on the same page about how we'd like things to be, there's still confusion about who is responsible for what. And there may be a lack of trust and confidence as well. For example, clinicians may be concerned about whether the supply chain manager will actually perform the right actions, and vice versa. Everyone agrees that we want clinicians to focus on what matters most, caring for patients. So why do we ask nurses to spend so much time with inventory management? And what can we do to address the challenge? We know there has to be a better way, and there is. We can start by clearly defining roles and responsibilities, improving communications among cross-functional teams, gaining stakeholder buy-in to make needed changes, and most importantly, making those changes as comfortable as possible so that clinicians don't feel compelled to create their own workarounds. But simply agreeing isn't enough. We have to establish clear roles and responsibilities for every stakeholder. Next, we must understand, simplify, and effectively automate inventory management as a critical part of the solution. Let's take a look at some differences between automation and manual processes. In order to automate, we first need to understand and simplify inventory management. I call this USA, Understand, Simplify, Automate. Let's focus on one area that's ripe for improvement. What happens when products are logged in and reordered using the current manual process? There can be numerous steps in the manual process for managing tissue, for example. These steps include opening the supply in the room, charging the supply, documenting the supply, completing the implant log, and reconciling. If there's an accurate preference card, the nurse can select and charge for the supporting items on that card. Otherwise, the nurse needs to enter every item manually, which can take up to 1 minute per item. If additional items are opened during the case, each of these steps is repeated. Imagine the frustration the nurse must feel. Every error can take the nurse as much as 15 minutes to correct, assuming the nurse even detects the error. Undetected errors are often simply lost, charges never captured. Now compare that to an automated system for inventory management. Multiple steps suddenly just become a couple of steps. The nurse simply scans the product at the point of use using either barcode or RFID technology, depending on the product and the value. Products are automatically logged and reordered, and charges are captured. The Hospital Information System, or HIS, the Materials Management Information System, or MMIS, the Hemodynamic System, and the Patient Encounter Records are all accurately completed. And all these tasks are being done manually by your nurses today. How much time does the nurse spend using all this sophisticated technology? In fact, it's not minutes per product, but it's seconds. In fact, just 5 seconds or less per item. What can a hospital do to replace manual processes with more effective automation? Now, on the surface, it might appear next to impossible to transform your supply chain so dramatically. The inventory management issues may seem too large, and the shift to automation may seem too great, but it is possible and can and is being done. The trick is knowing what steps to take, starting with the first one, recognizing there is a problem in the first place, and then agreeing on the vision and prioritizing goals for improvement. For example, ask any CEO what the biggest expense worry is, and chances are it'll be the OR or the cath lab. Top of mind are the charge capture and physician preference item barriers that I mentioned earlier. To solve the problem, we have to build a stronger shared vision between the clinical departments and supply chain. The goal should be to make supplies run through the hospital more effectively. It is too big of a challenge for any one stakeholder because the problem is ingrained everywhere. It impacts financial, operational, and clinical areas at the same time. We start by building alignment with key stakeholders, including clinicians, the medical staff, department leadership, supply chain management, IT, finance, the C-suite, everyone. This key first step is often missed during improvement initiatives, which is often why these well-intentioned efforts fail. Then, assess the current state of your inventory management and supply chain in 3 steps. First, do a complete walkthrough, something your lean folks call Gemba, from the loading dock to the point of care, and document all of these processes. Second, interview your key stakeholders to understand what really happens. There are always 3 versions of a process. There's what's supposed to happen, there's what leadership thinks is happening, and then there's what's really going on. Third, determine baseline data and metrics for measurement. If you cannot measure it, and you cannot control it, and if you cannot control it, it goes right back to the way it used to be, like it never even happened in the first place. Worse, future efforts will be met by greater resistance. Have you ever heard this? Yeah, we tried that. It didn't work. Which brings us to the final step, understanding your automation options to transform your supply chain from end to end, from the manufacturer all the way to the point of care. Let's take a look. There are several best practices for success, which include RFID technology for high-value products such as implants, and there are many advantages. Let me list a few. 1, RFID helps eliminate the possibility of implanting an expired product. 2, RFID quickly locates recalled products. 3, there's easy access for clinicians and it's intuitive. Just take the product and go, and if you don't use it, just put it back on the shelf. 4, because the product's location is tracked automatically, you always know where it is. If another department borrows it, you know it. If it's not on the shelf but hasn't been charged to a patient, you can find it. And 5, the solution is scalable. It allows you to start small as you build a case for technology and grow as your needs change within the department or in the hospital or even across the entire IDN. A tube-in Kanban system should be used for commodities. The supply chain team takes care of managing inventory and rotating stock. This system supports first-in, first-out inventory management, which helps avoid expired and obsolete products. Clinicians can just take the product and go. Nurses love this. Powerful analytics measure demand variation and make stocking recommendations, so you never have too much or too little available for patient care. Accurate electronic charge capture, which replaces many manual processes with one automated step that simply takes seconds to complete. No hard copy logs to keep, plus you'll improve compliance. Interface with your hospital systems, your HIS, your MMIS, your hemodynamics, to improve data connectivity. The interface also eliminates the possibility of double entry. No cycle counting. There is no value in counting. This eliminates the inevitable manual counting errors and significantly reduces the time spent managing inventory, especially by your clinical staff. And a strong analytics program that provides accurate real-time data so you can collaborate with your supply chain team to set inventory levels based on predictable ordering patterns. Now let's take a look at how these tools come together to form a total inventory management solution. First, the ideal inventory management solution must address the sheer scope and complexity of your supplies and have the right inventory tool for the right inventory product, as you see here. Now that may sound simple, and while using it actually is, the right inventory management system is built on a foundation of complex supply chain science based on lean methodologies and Six Sigma controls that reduce process variation. The right system is proactive versus reactive, as it improves effectivity and drives down cost, all while freeing up more clinical time that should be dedicated to patients. The right system is also scalable and connects your supply chain end to end, from the manufacturer to the point of care. The system automatically collects actionable data about product consumption and utilization by physician, which can help optimize your inventory spend. Above all, the right system gives you visibility and a level of control that you have never had before. I've implemented solutions where a hospital might think it has 17 days of inventory on hand when it actually has 70 days, 70 days of inventory of items they rarely use and only a 2-day stock of what is critically needed. But add the upstream visibility of the right inventory management program and that problem goes away. You cannot manage what you cannot see. but automate and manage your inventory the right way, and you can see everything. So how do we roll these best practices into a specific workflow model, such as the OR? We know some of the most challenging areas of OR inventory management are tissue, ortho, and suture. How can we use automated inventory management to address these challenges? And by doing so, to help address the growing financial pressures of value-based payments and the threat of declining reimbursements. Imagine using a cloud-based analytics program to conduct a deep analysis of your costs per OR case. This level of data granularity would reveal utilization by supplier, by product type, by case type, by procedure area, and by individual physician. Not only would you have a thorough itemization of your total costs by manufacturer, by clinician, by OR suite or lab, by DRG, you would also reveal new opportunities to support standardization, reduce variability, and improve efficiency. This is the power of automating your inventory management. Cardinal Health Inventory Management Solutions uses RFID-enabled technology as the foundation. We created the solution to meet the challenges that we know you're facing today because they are our challenges too. We are all working to overcome the greatest cost pressures any of us have ever faced in our careers. Shifting inventory responsibility from clinicians to the supply chain so nurses can focus more on patient care. Replacing manual and inefficient processes with leading-edge automation. Eliminating waste and errors as a result. Providing a wealth of data analytics that reveal what actually happens at the point of care to improve product utilization and purchasing. Optimizing preference cards to further improve and simplify processes. Effectively managing Joint Commission compliance requirements. And increasing employee satisfaction for our supply chain and clinical staffs, which support better outcomes and therefore greater patient satisfaction. Heather, we built the Cardinal Health Inventory Management Solutions with you in mind, the healthcare professional, whether you're in supply chain or direct patient care. I know you appreciate the benefits of this solution.
Absolutely. As a clinician, I remember how challenging it was to do all of those steps manually. An automated solution using RFID technology makes it simple to capture all of the data, so I can focus my attention where it matters most, taking care of my patient. Our solution is also scalable to your needs, so you can implement it at your own pace. The system is designed to start small within a specific area, such as tissue or suture, and grow from there. Most importantly, you'll have a new and effective way to meet the challenges of value-based payments, declining reimbursements, and growing pressure to reduce costs and waste in the healthcare supply chain. This is the future of automating inventory management throughout your organization. Best of all, there's no need to wait. It's here right now at Cardinal Health. Thank you all for your time and attention today. We would be happy now to answer your questions.
Thank you, Heather and Steve, for a very informative and enjoyable presentation. Like Heather said, we will now begin the Q&A portion of the program. As a reminder, you can submit any questions you have by typing them into your control panel in the space labeled Enter a Question for Staff and clicking Send. Our presenters will attempt to answer as many questions as they can during the time we have for Q&A, and will follow up on questions they do not have the opportunity to address. So we're going to go ahead and get started with the first question we have that came in from the audience, and this is directed to Heather or Steve, and it says, we are currently using an automated inventory management system and struggle with clinical compliance. How is your solution different?
I'll take this. You know, it's interesting. I spend a lot of time in hospitals, and I hear this complaint about clinical compliance. And what I hear is, boy, if the nurses would just do their job. and in my mind, materials management should never be the nurse's job. I recently had an executive tell me that they don't have an issue with compliance, that their compliance is really high, and I said, I got to see this. This is fantastic. I've never seen 100% compliance. And the reply was, well, it's not 100%. It's in the 90s. And in the back of my head, I was thinking, it doesn't really matter then whether you're 90% compliant or 30% compliant. You still have to cycle count because neither one is correct. See, any automated inventory management solution that requires nurses to achieve compliance, and compliance, for anyone who's not aware of it, is a measurement, it's a metric that where we look at the on-hand inventory actual versus the on-hand inventory that the system says, and the delta we blame on folks not doing what they're supposed to do, and we measure it as a compliance measurement. In our system, we don't require nurses to do anything like that. In fact, any materials management system that actually requires a compliance metric is not a capable system. You should have a grab-and-go process that uses a Kanban system. This is something we learned from Toyota. They've been doing it for 75 years and haven't changed it. It is the best, simplest system in the world. We shouldn't require nurses to stop and enter data. That's where errors are made, and if they don't do it for some reason, we don't know about it until we get into trouble. And I talked earlier about the closed cabinetry example. They will always find a workaround. I cannot tell you how many times I've seen where locked doors have been taped so that the lock doesn't engage, or where someone standing beside a cabinet puts their foot in the cabinet door to keep it from closing when someone walks away so they can get what they need.
Well, thank you, Steve, for that great response. We're going to go ahead and move on to the next question, which is, do you think pay for value is here to stay, or do you see modifications being made as things progress?
I'm happy to take that. Since, as we discussed, payers currently spend considerably on the post-acute side, where there's significant variance in cost and quality. Readmissions are costing the healthcare system $30 to $40 billion annually. I do feel value-based care is here to stay. Current state, we're spending $200 billion in post-acute spending. That spend is growing by 6% annually. Therefore, clinical models that eliminate the post-acute variation will continue to evolve as consumers are expecting the highest quality products and services and demanding coordination among providers. Therefore, consumer pressure and the need for continued economic reform will dictate a future system that drives both clinical and financial value. The days of unchecked fee-for-service, volume-driven care practices will likely all become obsolete, in my opinion.
Well, thank you, Heather. And moving on right through the questions, the next one that came in is directed at either of you, Steve or Heather, and it is, one of my biggest challenges is charge capture. What suggestions do you have for addressing this pain point?
I like this question, and before I answer how to address the pain point, I would recommend you need to take a hard look at whether or not you should even be doing it. You get these aha moments when in your career, and one of them happened a couple of years ago when we were going through this exact issue. As reimbursement moves to more of a bundled style of payment, you've got to take a hard look at whether or not you're actually getting reimbursed for things that you're doing charge capture for. Recently had a CFO of a large IDN that we were working with come back and said, hey, do you realize that we're spending more on charge capture in our non-procedural areas than we're actually getting reimbursed? So the activities and the work of going through and putting together all that capture was actually higher than what the hospital is seeing in reimbursement. Recommendation that we have, frankly, is in your non-procedural areas, you should take a hard look at whether you should even be doing it in the first place. Is the juice worth the squeeze? In your procedural areas, it makes absolute sense. We're already capturing that data through an SAT feed. We are capturing the information for hemodynamic system, hospital information systems, etc. So grabbing that information as a part of doing that transaction for a charge capture, that makes sense.
Well, thank you, Steve. And the next question, this is directed at either of you as well, is can you provide more insight on the value-based payment models, and of the four, do you think certain ones will be preferred?
Sure. So from the clinician perspective, cohort-driven models such as the orthopedic CCJR that we discussed, or even the various bundles, make the most sense to me, and also assist with care standardization and promotion of evidence-based practices that drive that consistent high-quality outcome that systems are looking for. So to answer your question, I don't have a crystal ball, yet I foresee commoditization of medical devices and greater adoption of clinical pathways as components of our future-based models.
Thank you, Heather. The next question, moving on, is let's see. You mentioned one of the best practices is to have a strong analytics platform. Can you go into more detail about what can be achieved with real-time data?
Sure. So what real-time data allows you to do is to understand exactly what's happening at a point in time. We tend to use a lot of averages when we do data planning and material planning, and averages to me are just different versions of lies, because the problem is always the size of the lie. Averages don't take into account things like seasonal effects. So some place like Phoenix, Arizona, or Southern Florida, or the Jersey Shore are going to have significant swings in the patient demographics, etc., that they see throughout the year. And what a powerful analytics platform allows you to do is to see what those changes look like, to be able to have the right thing in the right place at the right time in the right inventory level, the right quantity. Visibility into product usage is really, really important as well. And you know, a lot of folks do these things ad hoc, or they do it in kind of a, hey, I've always done it this way, or no one knows my business like I know my business kind of approach. And frankly, when we look at how those processes run, we tend to be carrying a tremendous amount of inventory. And my fear with a lot of inventory is, A, that is capital dollars that are tied up collecting dust on the shelf, and second, the fact that we have this huge opportunity for obsolete and expired product. What I'd love to be able to do is to be able to see in real time what demand looks like and be able to feed that information back through my supply chain all the way to the manufacturer. Because we have to recognize that the inefficiencies that are felt in the supply chain are all paid for ultimately by the provider. And so if the manufacturer has better visibility to what real-time utilization looks like, it allows the entire supply chain to effectively be right-sized. You know, we worry when things like stockouts happen, and invariably there's also some place that has too much of something, and this happens across the entire supply chain.
Well, thank you, Steve. It looks like we still have time for a few more questions, so I'm going to continue to work through the questions that have come in from the audience. The next one is for either Steve or Heather, and it is, can you elaborate on what RFID technology is?
Oh, I think that comes to me. Okay. Well, we suggest RFID technology be used effectively on higher value things. So A, I wouldn't use an RFID platform on anything less than, say, $50. That's a good starting point. What RFID allows you to do is to place a license plate, if you will, like a car has a VIN number, at each level. And when you think about something like the unique device identification law, it requires manufacturers currently, and you've got to believe sometime in the future, providers, to be able to know where every item is at each level, and for every each, what the individual serial number is, the expiration date, the lot tracking information, and ultimately through patient encounter information, which patient has that implantable. You know, it's funny, coming from automotive into healthcare 10 years ago, when I first started hearing talk about the UDI law, folks were saying, this is crazy, we can't do it. And in my mind, I'm thinking, no, this is not new. This is not new technology. 25 years ago, I knew exactly what airbag was in what car and who owns it. And anyone who has ever purchased a used vehicle and subsequently received a recall notice knows this to be true. Every car has a unique device identification. And RFID is a wonderful platform to allow that to happen. Frankly, it's easy to use. Some folks ask about the difference between RFID and barcode scanning. And they both get to essentially the same thing. Difference is, what barcode scanning requires is that for you to actually touch every single item. RFID allows you to do that without having to physically touch it. If you're using an RFID-enabled cabinet, then there's no labor at all required to do inventory checks. And if you are not using a cabinet, then what RFID allows you to do is to get a pretty wide sweep from a pretty good distance. So if you think about it, if you're really, really quick at it, you might be able to barcode scan one item every 3 or 4 seconds. You can RFID scan 50 items in 1 second.
Well, thank you, Steve, so much for that very informative response. And it looks like we have time for at least one more question. So we'll go ahead and move on to it. And this last question we have here is, if you were to identify the top 3 priorities for getting started, what would they be?
Actually, I think I talked about this earlier. So first things first, what's your highest pain point? You have to get folks engaged to solve a problem. So you've got to come to a common belief of what our biggest problem is. Generally speaking, it's your highest dollar items, or it's your greatest patient impact items. And sometimes it's things like shrinkage. Boy, we're losing all this stuff, we can't find it. We've heard this with cath labs. Where are all these catheters going? They're disappearing. And I'm pretty sure that the guy down the street from me who makes all these noises in his garage on the weekend doesn't have a home cath lab business going on. There's something happening here, right? And often it's just we're losing things because we don't have the means to be able to do track, trace, and control, which again goes back to RFID. There's something about RFID that I really like that we've done in our platform. We are tied into the FDA, which means that we know that when there is a product recall, and on a product with an RFID tag that's been recalled that a provider may not be aware of, when you go to scan it, because the solution is cloud-based, the system automatically comes back and tells you, no, you can't use this. This product is on recall, or the product's been expired. The biggest issue, I think, from a priority standpoint is scalability. Don't try to take on too much at once. Don't try to boil the whole ocean at the same time. You want to be able to start small, gain belief, gain confidence, and have a platform that allows you to expand as you go.
Well, thank you so much, Steve. It looks like we've worked through all the questions that we have time for today, but I want to again thank our presenters for their excellent presentation and to all the audience members for participating today. We look forward to having you join us for future webinars. This concludes today's program. Have a wonderful afternoon.